Hello and welcome to the Resilient Kid podcast. So, last week we talked about boundaries, and it's a real topic that I find children really struggle, but adults really struggle as well. And if we want to raise resilient, confident kids, then we really need to dig deep on boundaries and kind of the nuances and explore how they impact the different aspects of our kids' lives. So, today we're going to have a look a little bit deeper. We're going to look at how we run roughshod over boundaries quite often. And sometimes we do that as adults, and we do that like over our kids' boundaries. And let's call them violations, because I think sometimes we don't see it as important as it is. And actually, they are really important, and they're important because we need to future proof our kids. So if we're not teaching them about boundaries, then how are they expected to withhold them, hold that line steady as they approach teens? So in the first episode, we touched on how you can do it, but today, I want us to talk about a little bit more about the different types and how either unknowingly or deliberately sometimes people cross boundaries with the various different sections that we have, and then go a little bit deeper in how we can help our kids. So, for instance, we talked about physical boundaries last week and that physical intrusion. And I think I used the example of, there was a particular uncle that I just didn't feel comfortable. And my mum very much withheld that and was an advocate for that and said, you absolutely don't. I'm quite like that with my kids. We're a huggy, kissy family, but if they don't want to, I won't ever make them. Um, but for our kids, kind of just digging a little bit deeper in that, it can include someone who's in their personal space, someone who's too close to them or touches them without, that unwanted kind of physical touch. And it can make kids, no matter their age, feel uncomfortable and very unsure on how to react. We also have like that emotional crossing of boundary. And this is quite often when somebody guilt trips you. They belittle your feelings, they overshare in front of you. So I don't know if you've ever done, I'm sure I have done this over time, but kind of shared about, one of my kids, what they were going through and stuff. Now, it's one thing if you just need a bit of support with it, but it's another thing sharing it and not having their permission. And particularly if you do this in front of them, it really, then what you're doing is you're mixing their emotions, aren't you? It's like really confusing because A, they don't know how to feel about this, but B, they're now responsible for somebody else's emotions as well. So yeah, kind of just be really aware of that. Time over commitment. Now, this is quite funny and probably a bit of a bone of contention sometimes in our house. Not so much now, but it definitely used to be. So often we assume our kids' availability without actually asking, don't we? Now, this I think you will come across a lot more if you've got teens in the house. I don't know about you, but I used to volunteer the hobby, the kids, and actually my kids do volunteer. They usually, the eldest volunteers for 3 different events during the year. And this is just because they, she's really good, she's really sociable, she knows what she's doing, and she just cracks on. And so actually she volunteered at one event because somebody was short, and I said, oh, she'll do it. And again, exactly like, committing her without actually asking her. And they just loved her. And so then she ended up helping out at 3 different events. Now, in all honesty, that's Paddy. In all honesty, she does enjoy them. She, you know, but there is an element where I will go. That's it. You go if you want. Like, you're done. You've done your bit. You absolutely go. And, next year we won't have that because she'll be at university. But I definitely have, said, oh, the hubby will do that for you. And then he's kind of looked at me as if to go, when are we going to fit that? So, yeah, I am definitely guilty of that. But I think we need to be aware because also, we've got to teach them, haven't we? And it's not fair sometimes. Sometimes it can just be like after school as well, where you say, oh, yeah, we'll just go and visit the grandparents, whatever. And, your kids might be shattered, especially this time of year. It's coming to the end of term. Everyone's tired. Okay, so the next one is kind of that intellectual, kind of overreach, over arc, I would call it. And it's when someone disregards your child's thoughts or forces their own opinions to be them. Now, this I've noticed happens a lot with grandparents. Don't think they really mean anything by it, but often what happens is grandparents kind of go, well, I know better. And they might well do because, they're older, more experienced, wiser. However, disregarding what your child thinks, that's crossing a line, isn't it? And actually, it's a violation of what we call intellectual boundaries. So just kind of being aware of that. And then the last one is around material exploitation. Now, exploitation might seem a really strong word, but have you ever had it where one of your kids' friends has borrowed something and then they don't get it back? And there is that level of disrespect, or a disrespect when it's been returned and it's broken, or, it's not in the same condition. And actually, I think we don't often talk about that with our kids, kind of talking to them about, listen, it might come back in a different condition. You might not get it back. Are you still okay? And have you ever done it and where you've offered out one of your kids clothes, shoes, toys, whatever it is? So again, that's down to us. We need to be very aware of that. And I think as parents, it's really essential that we help children recognize these boundary violations, so they can identify when that boundary is being crossed for themselves. All right. So we will talk about how they can respond as well shortly. I just want to go into a little bit, and this is because this has come up for me this week. And I kind of said last week on the podcast, yeah, probably do another one, but actually there was a few things that came up with various different clients this week, and I thought, actually, I'm definitely going to do a follow-up for this reason. So boundaries are not just about personal space. We've heard about the different areas of our life that boundaries are, but let's look at how boundaries play out in very key settings for kids where they might face challenges. And when I say kids, if you know me, I always say kids because I'm a Manchester girl, but I do mean any age. Yeah. Social media. Now, in today's world, we're constantly interacting in that digital space as well as physical space. And that comes with its own unique challenges, doesn't it? We need to understand digital boundaries. We need to understand the privacy settings, the appropriate sharing, the online friendships. And I think sometimes as they get older, we kind of think, oh, well, they've got it, they know. But actually, I know loads of clients who know how to circumnavigate the system. I know, and these are young clients, I know loads who they know the PIN codes to change the timings and stuff. I once had a client who there is an app, so it looks like a calculator on your phone, but actually behind that, you put in a code and behind that is loads of pictures, that you don't want anyone to see, or files or messages that you don't want people to see. So children are very savvy, and it is up to us to take responsibility for their social media use until they are of an age that they can handle that themselves. Have you had the conversation about sharing personal information or photos? Because if you share personal information or photos of another person, I think this is technically illegal, and I do need to check that it still is. I think it is. If you haven't got permission by that person, it is illegal to share any personal information and photos. And that, we often talk about kids sending nudes and things like that. I'm not talking about, I'm just talking generally. Boundaries within social media are hard to navigate, but they're not if you have a very clear rule in your house. If you have a very... So my children are on Insta. They don't share anything. They don't put posts up. Or there might be the odd post, say, if the youngest is in a play or whatever, but even the oldest does not, she does, and she's nearly 18. She does not put posts up there. She might put some on a story, which is very quick, but they are very careful around that because this is an imprint for life as well. Do you remember a few years ago there was a youth minister elected into Parliament, and then a journalist, had dug in and she'd sent a tweet that was racist, and actually she got this. I think it was 5 years earlier. She was 13 when she sent that tweet, and and I'm sure she was older and wiser, and she was very apologetic. But these kind of things are imprinted, and if we want our kids to be respectful of others, we need for them to respect their own boundaries and respect that of other people as well. Boundaries at school. Oh, kids spend a lot of time at school, don't they? They're trying to navigate peer relationships, relationships with their teachers, their learning environment, which is constantly moving. They don't go and sit in one class like they do in primary, do they, in high school? So it's important for them to recognise physical, emotional, and intellectual boundaries are being violated in a classroom or a social setting. So, for instance, if somebody's copying their work, that's crossing a boundary. If somebody's invading their personal space, that is crossing a boundary. And I think it's very difficult because when you're at school, teachers often hold the power. And if kids are messing about or teachers get too close, we need for them to be aware and advocate for kids in the classroom so that, because I've had it, where a child is purposely leaning over another person's desk. That's crossing a boundary. So we need our kids to be aware that that's not okay. It's not okay. Family boundaries. So these are the kind of social media, school, and family for me is all around where are they spending most of their time. And I think for kids, it's quite difficult for them to set boundaries within their own family, within the extended family dynamics, because younger people, the young ones often don't feel like they can ask for space. And, older ones don't feel like they can ask for privacy. I think I used the example last week of always knock in before you go in. And I think as long as you communicate openly so everyone understands what each other's personal boundaries are, because, one child might be on the couch and be right up against you, and another one might not want you to sit that close. I know it sounds simple, but it is about respect. It's about their self-respect as well, but being able to advocate for themselves as well. I am actually going to do a podcast on agency and advocating because I think it's really important. So let's get into teaching kids kind of the language around boundaries. So one of the most powerful tools that we can give them is for them to be able to communicate clearly. And so how do we get them to develop this? So use simple language. That's, the first one, and that's for any age. As they're learning to, navigate the social situations, encourage them to say things like, I don't feel comfortable with that, or please give me some space. It just allows them to express their needs without overcomplicating stuff. And I don't know about you, but as a young person, when I was growing up, I definitely felt like I had to people please. And I think it's really important, and I will often speak to the kids like, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. That's, just say no. Like, absolutely say no there. Then let's look at modeling the boundaries. So we know the old adage, children learn by example. So make sure you're modeling healthy boundaries. If you need time for yourself, say, I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to take 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes. Please don't interrupt. And that teaches them that you're taking care of your needs. They often will see me and I'll say, listen, I've just finished with a client, I just need 10 minutes. And that's my time to decompress so that I'm there for them, and I've had that time, which I think is, really important. And again, like last week, don't be afraid to have these conversations around the dinner and play out different situations. I know as adults we hate role playing, but just things like, what would you say if your friend asked that? Get them comfortable. You are building those patterns in their brain. You're increasing their confidence level, and they'll know in times that they really need it, they'll have the answers. But it does take practice. Like, it absolutely does take practice. Okay. So, difference, I guess, that we need to kind of just reiterate is we need to talk about assertiveness versus aggression. So assertiveness is be very calm, clearly stating your needs or how you feel. I'm not okay with that. Please don't touch my things. You can't borrow my things. That's being assertive. And aggression is kind of involves a different tone, shouting, attacking, disrespecting kind of language, blaming others. So it's really important that they understand and be able to differentiate between the two, because particularly if you've got siblings and you've got two siblings and they then start yelling at each other, that's it's not kind of withholding boundaries, that's just being aggressive. So we need to make them aware that they can very clearly and calmly ask what they need or state their feelings, and as they're adult, we must be there to be able to back them up with that. Okay, so why is setting boundaries an important part? Well, it's a really important part of resilience, but also it's an important part of emotional intelligence. And you can have the smartest kid, but they haven't got the ability to recognize and manage their own emotions and actually understand the emotions of others. And that's, why boundaries are really important in supporting that emotional intelligence. So we have like self-regulation. Setting boundaries helps children learn how to manage their emotions. If they say stuff like, I'm too tired to play now, they're learning to recognize their own limits, prioritizing their own well-being. And actually, I've got a young client and they said to one of their parents, can I go to bed now? And this parent said, I nearly fell off my chair. And they said, what, like, why are you going so early? And they said, well, actually, I am responsible. So if I don't want to be grumpy tomorrow, I know I'm tired now. So why am I going to stay up another hour when actually I can go to bed now and get an early night? And she said, I knew it had come from the work that you'd done. She said, but I was gobsmacked. And I think giving them those tools and getting them to be responsible, not just, trying to stretch the bedtime but actually be responsible for their own kind of well-being and their own, real thinking about what it's going to take for them to be at their best. It also builds empathy and respect. So understanding and respecting each other's boundaries is key to building empathy. Teaching our kids that when they respect other people's boundaries, not crossing over theirs, it's a sign of kindness, it's a sign of respect, and it strengthens the relationship. And I find those who are very clear on their own boundaries rarely cross others. We do some work at this time of year on transition. So year 6, we do a lot of work around, I think as they're moving up to year 7, as they're going up to high school, what we often think around is, do they, are they all going to make friends? They're all going to make these new best friends. And actually, that's not true. But also, what I really believe is, well, what kind of friend do you want to attract? Because actually, instead of just going, oh yeah, anybody could be my best friend. Well, actually, if they're not like you, if they're not, if they we do this exercise where we get them to look at what kind of friend they want. And then it's a very clear and easy path then. And boundaries comes up a lot in that. I don't want somebody who's going to make me play something that I don't want to or make me do. And actually, it works really well. And I think the work that we've done on the year sixes going into year seven is going to stand them in really good stead, because they're not going to be desperate friends. They're going to have a real clear understanding of what kind of friend they want. And then also, understanding boundaries, respecting boundaries helps with conflict resolution. It plays a huge role. If a child knows when to speak up about somebody's crossing a boundary or when to walk away, it can really de-escalate that conflict. And sometimes, in the case, it prevents harm as well, like definitely. So I think, for me, the building of emotional intelligence, we don't, we talked about future proofing this week. We talked about how it sets up patterns for various different aspects of boundaries. But actually, that emotional intelligence is really, really key, definitely. And then kind of just to, another kind of perspective is the long-term benefits. So we have improved mental health. Those kids who have strong boundaries in place and whose adults around them help them and advocate for those boundaries, then they avoid burnout. It reduces anxiety, and it really promotes emotional well-being. And I just think that's, mental health is everything. And I think we take it for granted until we see our kids struggle or we struggle with it. It helps them with the confidence. Those who practice setting boundaries grow into adults who are really comfortable in advocating for themselves. And I think having that agency, having that being able to advocate is one of the best gifts I ever gave my kids. They both can advocate very well. Now, now they're older. When they were younger, not so much, but now they absolutely can. And I think it's a real gift that they can do that. And they advocate for friends as well, which is really lovely. And it just overall builds healthier relationships. It leads to better communication, more respectful. And actually, don't we want that with our kids? Don't we want to have that healthy relationship? And I think sometimes what we have to do is just be aware that we're not, crossing their boundaries by accident. And so, yeah, I think that's it really for today. I know we've covered a lot there, and I feel like we've gone quite past, but I just really wanted us to look at the crossing of boundaries in the different areas where kids need them, and it is a really, really important life skill that we can teach our kids. And, we're future proofing them. We're absolutely future proofing them and raising emotionally intelligent and resilient young adults. So that's it for today. Next week, we've got an exciting guest, Leslie Thomas, who is amazing. And she goes into schools and teaches kids about money. But it's not just about money, it's about the emotional attachment and the emotions of money as well, and really enlightening. Even like for me, I was blown away with some of the stuff that she was saying. So thank you for tuning in to the Resilient Kid podcast. If you've got any questions or if you'd like to hear more about a specific topic, reach out. Because we'll always, always look at it. And actually, my VA Chantal, the lovely Chantal, who I'm always talking about, asked us to do boundaries. And who knew that it would be 2 episodes? So, yeah, thank you for listening. Take care and lots of love from my family to yours.